Stuart, great to talk to you about your contribution to the Future Work Forum report on the future of middle management. I seem to remember your chapter very much focused on the careers or the lack of the career ladder now in this world of networked organizations and flatter structures. Perhaps you'd like to take us through your thinking about what's the career ladder going to look like in the future.
Yeah, sure. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to write about this particular topic, Peter. Because it's something that, when I kind of dived into the topic and looked at the implications of this, it actually started to kind of excite me about the potential for the future. Because, I very much see it as a case of, the shackles are now coming off from what we used to see as like historical hierarchies and historical ways of leadership. And as you remove those shackles, comes empowerment and comes opportunity for people. And I think we're still probably trying to hold on a little bit to certain hierarchies and ways of working from the past because it kind of makes us secure, and that's also everything that we've known. And I've been in business now for over 40 years in corporate life, and I look back at my career, and over the decades, it's always been about moving forward to the next level. What is the next job title that I would want to have? And what is the salary that goes with that job title? And it was much less about really what are you going to contribute at that level, and more about just getting the kind of tick box of, I'm now in a team leader role. I'm now in a sector manager role. I'm now a sales director. I'm now a managing director, and those were the ways that I kind of defined my success in my career, and I think pretty much everybody did. But that's now shifting, and it's shifting because of things I'm sure some of the other partners have already spoken about on these podcasts. It's shifting due to the impact of AI. It's due to shifting of responsibilities of those that are in kind of middle management positions. And I think it's also shifting because of a change in attitudes from the younger generation. My daughter's now at university. And I think there was a study by Deloitte that kind of talked about what really matters to that generation now about work. What do they think success looks like? And they very much don't view success in terms of job titles and positions. They view it in terms of what are they able to contribute, what is their work-life balance, and what difference do they make? What is the meaning in what they do? And that very much kind of defines and will define the kind of future design of organizations. And I think it was only the minority of people that were in that study of that generation said that they wanted a senior leadership role. That wasn't their vision. And yet that was the definition of success, certainly for myself, Peter. I don't know if it was for you.
Well, yeah, I think so. And even in the old hierarchical world, of course, the number of people as you go up the pyramid gets smaller and smaller. You can only have one CEO. You can only have a room full of the C-suite. You've only have so many divisional directors, whatever. And as you go down, so by definition, not everybody's going to end up at the top of the pyramid. And you've experienced this, I know, that you get to a point which is kind of where middle managers are, really, where they have a lifetime decision to make. Do I want to somehow continue? I might have reached my potential in this organization, just sit here and sit tight and do same old job till I retire. Or do I want to opt out in midlife? Maybe, kids are off my hands, I'm financially more secure. I'll go my own way. That's always been the case. But I guess in the new world of less hierarchical organizations and more flatter ones, that's likely to happen even more. Middle managers opting out of the rat race or being forced out, whether they want to or not. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I think there are a number of people that are reaching a certain stage in their career. Particularly people in that kind of over 50s category. I do a lot of work on LinkedIn. I do a lot of posts, and I talk a lot about advocacy against ageism, and there's literally thousands of people kind of talk to me and send me messages on their own experiences, and a lot of that is the perception of people over 50, and there's an assumption there that somehow they're not able to continue learning. Maybe they think they're not able to embrace new technologies. And maybe they're losing some energy, and the reality is completely opposite. So there's some very deep rooted what I call systemic issues that are happening within the workplace, not in every company. I mean, there are some good examples of organizations that do embrace experience, and they embrace the older generations. But I think as a net result of that, and a lot of these people are from middle to senior management positions. They often lose their jobs. They struggle to get back immediately into a corporate role. They rethink their careers. They still have a lot to give, a lot to contribute, huge amounts of experience, and they end up considering things like portfolio careers. They consider things like mentoring and coaching, and I think a lot of the smart organizations are starting to realize that talent pool is a really rich pool of quality people with great experience that can contribute. And there's a lot of people in that category that they're no longer looking for the big salary. They're no longer looking for it's not about money. It becomes about purpose. It becomes about redefining the future of their lives and their careers. And when often when employers are recruiting people in that, they're talking to people that age group, they think they're going to ask for, huge salaries that they're not affordable. And yet, if you have the right conversation with them, as you've said, they've already paid off their mortgage. Maybe their children have already been through education and out the other side. And it's not about the money. It's about fulfillment, and it's about purpose.
That's guys one of the faults of the hierarchical organization, because seniority tends to go with age, and salary certainly goes with seniority. And so there's this assumption that the 50-plus-year-old has to be paid some fantastic executive salary. And there's something kind of wrong with them if they want to downsize. And the whole idea that somebody might actually want to maybe work part-time instead of full-time, because they've got a very interesting hobby or other thing, or they're doing
Yeah, it's
charity or something. Yeah.
it's I mean, it's very much subconscious bias, Peter, a lot of this thinking. And it comes from systemic beliefs over a lifetime. And because it's so deep rooted, it becomes quite hard to change. It becomes difficult to move the dial. It becomes difficult to embrace every organization into saying, hey, we see the value with people with experience. There's often a mindset of, well, oh, we need to take somebody for the future. Well, actually, most jobs really only have a lifespan of maybe 3 to 4 years. So why are you ruling out somebody who's maybe 55, who's 59 by the time that particular role or responsibility has come to an end? So there's a lot of responsibility, I think, upon organizations to design their careers so that they're really maximizing the benefit of those with experience. I'm a big believer in organizations that embrace intergenerational working, because I think this reverse mentoring is such a great opportunity, because you've got people at both ends of their career spectrum. If they're open to it, they can share so much information, and actually, you've got skill development and competence development going on at either end of the age spectrum, which is actually really exciting and is proven to be one of the best ways of working.
Yeah, also you get the 50-plus-year-old person who already has experience, who can still learn more in the organization, but is not about to quit after a couple of years because they're probably going to stay on for a while, versus the new graduate, say, who's in your organization for a couple of years to get a bit of experience and then go off somewhere else. And so you've invested in training them, and then it's great for the rest of their career, but possibly they're not going to want to stay with you, or indeed you may recruit, big consultancies recruit 100 graduates a year. Actually, after the first few years, they only need 50 of them. So there's a natural turnover. But interesting, that brings me on to the kind of the process in the past always been, where do your middle managers come from? They come from your more junior professional staff, say, who have kind of worked their way up and have learned on the job a lot about how things work. In the new world of more remote working, flatter network structures, uh, are we still going to are we going to be able to develop the new skills that are needed for middle managers in just through some sort
I
of
mean,
osmosis, or are we going to have more formal training programs, or how's that going to work?
the way that I kind of see this a little bit, Peter, is I think that it will become more about, learning agility, and the ability to, to engage people, the ability to lead in a particular way, the ability to align people around a positive vision. These are going to be some of the skills that become more powerful. We often talked about emotional intelligence as well as cognitive, and I think that will start to become, more influential within an organization. And people will be looking for outputs now far more than job titles. And I think that's something that I think is great, because it will encourage people to learn across a spectrum of maybe different skills and different functional areas. So I think what we will find is, no longer will it be kind of a linear hierarchical approach to the career. It will be more a case of picking up as many skills as they can from as many places as they can, and being very open to it and have an appetite for it. And certainly, again, the younger generations don't expect to spend 5 to 10 years just doing their time in a role before they get considered for something else, right? They're incredibly hungry for knowledge, and they have a real appetite for learning. So, the leaders that they will admire will be the ones that coach them, that mentor them, that give them information, that source new information for them. So they're facilitating their development as individuals, and creating opportunities for them. And as that generation, as that generation picks up that knowledge, we're going to have much more rounded leaders in the future, Peter, that have got far more insight and respect for different functional areas because they'll have experienced them. We won't just have a situation which we had in the past, where if you were in sales, you moved through the sales ladder, you maybe became a sales director, then you became a managing director with only one functional skill behind you. You could have 3 to 4 different functional skills behind you before you may be in a very senior leadership position. So I think, and the only way that you will be successful through that process is through having that ability to be trusted, to be able to manage stakeholders. No longer will we see, touch wood, we won't see that command and control, dictatorial leadership style who's only got there because they performed well in one function and they kept getting promoted and promoted to the next level. We'll have people that in leadership roles who are trusted by others, can empathize with others because they've been there and done that job or worked in that functional area. I think, and this is where we talk about the shackles coming off, is this change, which could be fearful for some people, I think is actually going to create better environments and probably better workplaces in the future, where I think things like compassion and empathy and trust and respect, are much more commonplace, Peter. And I think, and I'll certainly be glad to see the back of toxic leadership, as and when we get beyond it.
Yeah. Although, of course, there are still quite a lot of people, some quite visible leaders of large organizations whose views are still somewhat antiquated in terms of how they want people to work, because they came up through a hierarchical kind of authoritarian top-down management organization, and that's kind of their view of the world still. So do you think we're going to have to wait almost for a generational change of the new leaders coming through the top, or are some of the existing leaders going to see the light, or is technology and the market going to force them to have to change anyway, because we can't work in the old way anymore?
I think it will be a blend of all three factors, Peter. I think it won't be a case of one particular influence on the workplace. There'll be a number of things. I think if an organization happens to be performing and it's delivering its numbers and it's achieving its targets and shareholders are happy with how that company's measured, then some of those organizations may house different leadership skills and different capabilities. But I do think over time, as the new generation starts to flow through, and the younger generations don't see flexibility at work and hybrid working as a perk, Peter. It's not a perk. It's part of their fundamental expectation of what work looks like. And I think when you get to that point, there'll be certain antiquated views of leadership that probably don't survive anymore because people won't respond, and people only respond well to leadership ultimately if they trust the leadership and they believe in it. And I think that's where you will get ultimately you'll get a conflict of expectations. And I think it's a really kind of positive direction that we're heading in, Peter. But I think there's a challenge though for existing leaders in, this is where I think organizations like the Future Work Forum and the incredible partners we've got can give guidance, because this is a really, really challenging time, because with AI moving so fast, everybody's still playing catch up. This is, well, I say not everybody. I mean, there's people who know how to code AI. There's people who know how to apply it. There are some people who've got a pretty good idea of its capability, but for the majority of us, we're being hit by it, right? It's something that's crept up and knocking us on the back of the head, and we're saying, what do we do about this? We don't even understand it, right? So I think leaders have got big challenges on their hands. I think more than ever before, they should really be looking at the research, the insights, the case studies of organizations and how different companies are kind of working through AI. I heard the other day, Peter, from a contact that, and I thought this was terrific. I mean, that PepsiCo actually 50% of their performance measure on their leaders is down to how well they develop the people in their teams.
Wow.
50%, that's half of their success criteria based on how well they develop the people who work for them and work with them. And I think that's, again, that's tremendously encouraging, because I think historically we used to develop people and teams and not really ever be recognized for it unless the bottom line improved. So I think it drives the right behaviors anyway, your organizations that are taking that approach.
Yeah, because even more so because traditionally, because I'm happy to develop the people working for me up to a stage, but I don't want them to know too much or be too good. They might threaten my job. Yeah, so there's always the kind of the inner hierarchy again, self-protection. But back to your point about broadening skills, I guess if the middle managers are not so much going to be going up the hierarchy, they're going to be gaining different experience in different divisions within the organization, etc. Do you see the reward system changing that way? We've heard some companies trying to introduce skills-based pay, for example. So the more skills you have, the more you get paid. Quite difficult to then align that with making sure that those skills are being used in terms of paying for output. But do you see a reward system moving more towards people being broader rather than?
I think part of it will be skill based, so experiential, and there'll need to be ways of kind of measuring that. So how many new skills have you learned? How have you developed? You become potentially a richer asset for that organization, and therefore you should maybe go into a different pay band as and when you add new skills to what you're doing. It also would incentivize people to develop new skills and to add them into their particular toolkit. And then I think there's the other piece, which is output based, which will be, for those who are smart at designing solutions. Maybe they've understood and implemented a new AI application into an organization that's saved the company millions or made the company millions. These individuals should be paid incredibly well for that. And they should become the role models of, how do you financially benefit from working in certain organizations and companies. Um, and why not? It's productivity based ultimately, and I think that's an exciting thing about it. So I think it will be, it shouldn't just be about the time you spend in a company. It should be about how you evolve your skill set over that time. Then there'll need to be some smart systems on how that's measured and how you build pay grades around it. And then there's the results orientation piece, and I do think there's, if you contribute something significant yourself and it's a significant output, you should be rewarded. And also, you should be rewarded if the organization itself performs and you're part of that entire team. So, almost the kind of partnership model, which I think, again, or I think would be a good model to have in the future. But all of it does need rethinking from the position of, where are companies today, Peter? I mean, there'll be, if they do a diagnostic on how they remunerate, how they reward, how are they structured, I think the many companies are going to have to go through a new transformational period, both in terms of structure and ways of working. And because there's not many companies that have already gone through that process, it's going to be a little bit, the blind leading the blind, but we kind of have that direction and we're going to have to take some chances.
Yeah.
So, again, it comes down to insights from data research trends, and, engaging with organizations like the Future Work Forum to give some ideas.
It also is dependent on sort of external factors. AI, you've mentioned a couple of times, but it's an interesting observation I have that one of the biggest interventions in working was COVID, and all of a sudden people couldn't go to work anymore. They had to adopt remote working in very different ways. All of a sudden, all your meetings were on Zoom, et cetera, et cetera. And also people took the opportunity to reevaluate where work fitted into their lives as well, because they were spending more time with the family and so on. That was kind of a shock to the system and made, I think, a lot of leaders stop and think about what's work all about, how's it going to be in the future. Some of that, we've kind of drifted back a bit into people going back into the office because they're not trusted to work remotely quite as much anymore and so on. Now, what we're saying is AI is kind of the next serious interruption to the way we work. But based on the fact that COVID didn't manage to shift the mindset of a lot of stubborn leaders who still kind of didn't learn from it, do we think AI is going to be that bigger shift, or are we still going to end up after a few years of a few exciting things happening, sort of old habits coming back again?
Well, it's a good question, and I guess we're looking at these, I guess, these major impacts, these kind of global impacts on the workplace, and how we manage that. And I think certainly my kind of personal view, and I've been actually representing an AI platform recently, and I've got to understand what's behind it, kind of what's under the bonnet, and how it kind of works a little bit and how it operates, and I still believe that we're still at the tip of the iceberg here. I think there's a lot more to come from AI. I think we're going to have to rethink ways of working very, very quickly. I'll give my own situation as a bit of a case study here. I set up a Neilson consulting about 18 months ago, and my organization, exists of me and one or two AI platforms that help me to get my job done, to follow up on things, to question, to challenge, to act as my assistant, and things that would have previously taken me a week to do, I can do them in maybe 2 hours, right? And it's the very capability of AI and the access to information, that will speed things up exponentially, and it will be able to fulfill certain roles, which is why we're seeing the changing in organizational structure. Because, as we said, it's not so much about knowledge anymore. It's about the application of knowledge. It's about how do you interact with other humans in order to get things done. How do you execute once you have an idea and a solution? But reaching that point, so everything is going to speed up as a result of AI, and with that, careers are going to change. Responsibilities are going to change. And I do think there will be a period of time where there's, what is the right model? How do we cope with this? But I think, I don't think there's not many industries that are not impacted by AI, right? I think the majority of industries in some way, shape, or form are impacted. And certainly from my personal experience, there's those at the front end that code, they're super knowledgeable about coding. There's those that understand the application, and then there's those that are creative and say, could we do this? Could AI do this? Could we make this happen? And I still think we're very much at the start of the AI journey, Peter. And it's where do we go? What is beyond AI? Right? There's just going to be greater and greater sophistication, because a lot of it is based on machine learning. It's teaching itself now.
Yeah. So back to kind of the future role of middle management, because I guess you could argue now AI is bound to take over some of the functions that middle managers were performing. Communications, top to bottom, interpretation of the messages, the strategy into action, the marshalling of resources, etc. The one thing it probably won't be very good at doing, at least for a long time, is dealing with the human emotions. We talk about empowering employees, making them feel trusted, all these things that are to do, as you said earlier on, emotional intelligence, and which still needs kind of human to human contact. But probably you don't need, if AI is going to do a lot of the mechanical stuff, you don't need as many middle managers as there were. And the new role is more to do with people, sensitive activities and behavior and so on. So do you see quite a few of the old style middle managers ending up struggling in the new environment because essentially AI is doing their job?
Yeah, I think it's about, can AI will also create new opportunities in new industries. I mean, AI in itself is a new industry that's creating, thousands of jobs. So I think that will have an impact upon education and academics, and, and what are people learning? And what do those future jobs look like as well? Because again, there'll be new roles that emerge. Remember when the internet was first came on the scene, and there was kind of worry about the internet and how it might, erode particular jobs. And we've seen just a development of certain industries. But I do think it has to be thought through. I think if we just let it happen to us, then there could be people that whose careers end prematurely. And what do we do with that knowledge and those skills? But there'll always be a human factor that comes into play, and that human factor in business is so important. And I often say, what AI won't replace is the smell of an old bookshop, right? And actually, when I say that, everybody goes, I know exactly what that smells like. What a great place it is to spend time, right? And I think that's we will end up going down an even more human-centric route. And and I do think the good thing about the direction we're going in is that sometimes it takes us a lifetime to build self-awareness, and sometimes for the penny to drop that we can reframe how we think, and we should maybe manage our behaviors differently, and manage our thought processes differently. if younger people have been trained on self-awareness and personal insight, and on mindset, and how to how to manage their thinking at an earlier stage. I think not just the workplace will improve, but the world will get better as a result of that. So I do think there's some really interesting implications of what we've been talking about here today, Peter. And I think middle management is a topic that that's going to impact on lots and lots of other areas. I mean, we've had a very broad conversation today, and it's not just been about the removal of a layer in an organization, right? It's been about why is that being removed? What are the implications of that? And how is it going to kind of change and impact the future of work? And those that are older, those that are in it, those that are kind of already moving into the workplace. And I think it's a pretty it sounds a negative thing to say it's a disruptive time, but it is a disruptive time. But it's also, from disruption comes opportunities, and
Yeah, I, I think
I think, yeah,
it's very much like my analogy between AI and COVID. Each was it could have, well, the AI is obviously could be predicted in that it's an evolution of technology, but it's suddenly able to do all sorts of things we thought computers couldn't really do. And some of that replaces some activities we thought were really only human. But it probably will never do the smell of the coffee or the old bookshop or whatever. That's fine.
yeah,
It's good.
yeah, mm,
Uh, but so as a disruptive factor, probably you're right that now we're at an interesting stage of the evolution of work because we're again at one of those kind of watersheds. COVID had a bit of an impact. The number of people working remotely is much greater than it was before, even if there's a bit of a pushback on it. I think same thing with AI. It's bound to replace some human activities because it's more effective, efficient, cost effective to do it with a computer than do it with a person. How that will impact work as part of society, I think you're right. Maybe people will value the human aspects of work more and the mechanical aspects. It's a bit like AI, I suppose, the information example of robots in factories. We don't have people doing boring, dangerous jobs in factories anymore. Robots do it. And the more interesting work is left for the humans. I guess that's going to happen in the information industries as well.
yeah.
So anyway, so as we come towards the end of this, I think what would be interested in your view. And so, are you fairly optimistic about the way the world is going, or are you a bit a bit of a pessimist?
Well, no, I'm actually. I've always been. You probably know this anyway, Pete, but I'm always very optimistic, right? I always think it's a better place. And I remember a few years ago, I wrote an article for the Future Work Forum called "The Future of Work 2030: A Better Place."
Yep.
Right. And I think I only, even at that time, I only just touched on AI because it hadn't even really, hit us in the way that it has done. But for me, I'm a great believer in, rewarding people for their efforts and for productivity. So I think that's exciting. I think we'll move away from people just being paid big salaries because they've got big titles. I think it will drive an even more human-centered leadership approach of people with multi-skills and broader empathy, and as we've talked about, hopefully more self-awareness, that allows people to interact and motivate others and teams and help develop others a lot more. So, like I said at the beginning, I think this the removal, if you like, of the middle management layer, takes the shackles off,
Mm.
from the way that hierarchical organizations used to affect the working world and the working life. So yeah, I'm optimistic, Peter, and but I think there's quite a few challenges, and that's why we need organizations like the Future Work Forum to help guide, and hopefully we'll develop some great leaders along the way.
That's fantastic. Okay. It's been great discussing your views, Stuart, and looking forward to continuing to work with you over the years.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Peter.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye for now.
Bye.